Here's a nice, uncontroversial topic, one that's sure not to ruffle any feathers. I mean, it's only one man's opinion, right? That's all we're really talking about. And yet it's an opinion that, almost on the very second it's published, will be disseminated feverishly, reacted to by all manner of folks, whether they be excitable yelps from those who feel utterly vindicated, hyped and blessed by the Lord Almighty on Twitter, to one of the many old heads with a podcast talking about how this opinion, yet again, represents the thin end of the wedge and will probably lead to somebody snapping their spine in the near future, just to appease this one man and his opinions. I am, of course, talking about Dave Meltzer's star ratings. Normally this type of video goes through the various matches that Meltzer has given the fabled 5 stars or better to, but aside from there now being over 250 of those matches, I rather fancy talking about the ratings themselves. They do, after all, have this grand place in the land of wrestling discourse, and that's worth some discussion. Cause, well, what does it even mean? If it means anything at all. Is there worth to be found in this practice, or is it just utterly ridiculous? And where does it all even come from? As meta as it might be to make a wrestling video talking about people talking about wrestling, there's a lot of interesting stuff to unpack, so let's get on with it. Certainly when it comes to the man himself and his work, the star ratings do have an outsized importance. Dave Meltzer is, after all, wrestling's most visible and most prolific journalist. When the man finally decides to hang up his pen and clean his frickin' office, his legacy really should be the 40 plus years of extensive coverage of all things pro-graps around the world, a tome of wrestling history that scarcely leaves out even the most finite of details. His legacy should lie in the scoops that he broke, the reams of detailed analysis, the community he built, the lovingly crafted obituaries. Hell, the millions of match results from every promotion in the land. The Collective Wrestling Observer newsletter is essentially the entire story of professional wrestling from 1982 onwards, so really it's kind of hilarious that a huge chunk of that legacy, possibly the biggest chunk in fact, lies in how many asterisks he decides to put at the end of a description of a match. Now there are certain issues that are always going to be hot button when it comes to the stars, especially nowadays. Yes, the 2020s have already seen far more 5 stars or better ratings than any other decade before it, and we're not even halfway through. And of course there are all those times when the star scale gets broken. That's always guaranteed to generate tons of tweets, podcast minutes, all sorts of flame wars and the like. At the time of publication, Okada and Omega still have the high watermark, the 7 stars they earned on June 9th 2018 at Dominion, a match that, to be fair, Dave Meltzer did describe as the greatest he had ever seen, and rated it accordingly. We'll get more into all of this, a whole bunch of stat crunching, but Lord knows what the discourse is going to be like if the big man ever makes the decision to award that mark again, or, God forbid, go even higher. Now, of course, it shouldn't really be this way. It is, after all, just one man's opinion. The different positions on the scale have been fully broken down by the man himself, of course, everything from 0 stars being a dud that has no redeeming social value, to the fabled 5 stars being stupendous and something that Dave's only going to see a few times per year, but it is still an opinion. It doesn't actually mean much in the grand scheme of things. So why do we care so much? Well, let's break it down a bit further. Let's get a little into the history of this fabled star system. Obviously Meltzer's not the first guy to rate things using a star system, but funnily enough, he's not even the first guy to rate pro wrestling matches using a star system. And you probably wouldn't believe just who it was who came up with the idea. To understand the star system as it relates to wrestling, you need to look at a fella named Norman Weasel Dooley. In the late 1970s, Dooley started running one of wrestling's first and most influential dirt sheets, Weasel's World, and he decided to start including star ratings for matches after chatting with a good buddy of his, one James E. Cornette. Yes, one of the most vocal people against said star ratings today is the guy who came up with the idea in the first place. Cornette got the idea from Leonard Maltin, the highly influential film critic who rates movies on a 4-star scale. Norm Dooley would use that same 4-star scale, and yes, a couple of times he would also break that scale. Norm first broke the scale for a match in Memphis on March 23rd, 1981, a legendarily bloody no DQ bout between Jerry the King Lawler and Terry Funk. This was a time when the CWA Memphis territory was becoming white hot, with the summer's main storyline being Jerry Lawler and the Facers against Jimmy Hart's First Family. And on May 26th, Norm Dooley awarded 6 stars to a tag bout featuring superstar Bill Dundee and Dream Machine Troy Graham going against the First Family's Kevin Sullivan and Wayne Ferris. He then gave 6.5 stars to a by all accounts utterly classic 8-man tag a week later, where Dundee, Lawler, Dream Machine and Dutch Mantell took on Sullivan, Ferris and the Nightmares team of Danny Davis and Ken Wayne. Now in the end, Norm Dooley's Weasel's world didn't last all that long and wasn't exactly well known. It was gone by some point in the middle of the 80s. But it's the sort of deal where quite a lot of people who contributed to this newsletter or who read this newsletter, as well as various other early sheets like Greg Masorjak's Inside the Squared Circle, went on to make something of themselves in the industry, whether they be Cornette himself, or Eddie Gilbert, or Brian Hildebrand, or indeed Dave Meltzer, who started publishing the Wrestling Observer newsletter in 1982. Whenever Dave Meltzer is questioned about breaking the star scale, his answer, consistently, has been that Norm Dooley broke the scale first, so a limit for the scale already didn't exist when he started using it. Which is fair enough. Jim Cornette dedicated an entire and very interesting episode of his Cornette Experience podcast to Dooley and Weasel's World, and he said that the difference was that back then, they were just screwing around, and that the stars didn't really mean anything, seeing as the newsletter was only seen by 20 people or whatever. Fair enough again, but would that position have held if Norm Dooley's Weasel's World had gotten enough readers to the point where it became a lot more influential, to the point where, as a lot of the folks against Meltzer's star ratings argue, they had a big impact on in-ring action and changed the way that people wrestled? Now this, one of the central cruxes of the argument against the star rating, is a hard one to counter, because certainly no one thinks that wrestling should be entirely catered to the tastes of one man in particular. That, on its head, seems like a ridiculous situation. But is that really what's happening? On the face of it, it does sound absolutely ridiculous. Surely it would be more logical to say that a lot of current wrestling does appeal strongly to Dave Meltzer, but that change didn't happen because of him. The main style just changed to something that he enjoys. And just what is that style anyway? If you look at what matches get those big 5-star ratings from Dave Meltzer, it's not too hard to figure out. Big Dave likes big moves. Lots of big moves, mainly. A bombastic and highly dramatic story certainly helps a lot too, but a wide variety of big and exciting moves are where it's at. And I would also say that a big chunk of Meltzer's big ratings comes from the shock of seeing something that is new to him. Leaving aside folks from the current day, this has pretty much always been the case. At the very least, it's been the case since the 1990s, and the popularity of companies like All Japan at the height of Kings Road, as well as All Japan Women. Those guys could get 5 stars like it was nothing back then. There's no magic time where Dave Meltzer's opinion has really changed dramatically. It's what he's always enjoyed. The 1980s certainly saw a fair few big story-based matches hit the mark, particularly all manner of matches that featured Ric Flair in his prime against Wyndham, Steamboat and Funk, but a lot of the most innovative stuff was also grabbing those marks, whether it was Tiger Mask vs Dynamite Kid way back in the early part of the decade, or a whole chunk of UWF and All Japan Women bouts that represented the best of early shoot style and Joshi. The 90s in 5 stars is virtually all about Kings Road All Japan and the height of All Japan Women, but you get the odd big 5-star for matches that, again, represent something Meltzer might have not been too familiar with before really seeing it in action. Rey Mysterio Jr. vs Psychosis, and the These Days Michinoku Pro 10-man tag. If I was to point to a match that defines this in particular, I would go to the rather barren wastelands of the 2000s, a time when only 7 5-star ratings in total were doled out. One match in particular really stands out here, the Doe Fixer vs Blood Generation 6-man tag at ROH's 2006 Supercard of Honor show. For the people who regularly watched Dragon Gate, the antics of Shima, Dragon Kid, Genki Horiguchi, Masato Yoshino, Naruki Doi and Ryo Saito were already well known and loved. What those 6 wrestlers did on March the 31st at the Frontier Fieldhouse was, in many ways, pretty much what they were doing every other week or so in Japan. But, much like a fair few people who attended the show and watched the DVD afterwards, it wasn't necessarily something that Meltzer had seen much of before, and he was summarily blown the hell away when these two trios tore the house down, resulting in a 5-star rating that, even if it may have been a match like so many other Dragon Gate multi-man affairs from the time, was very justifiable considering the audience and the impact the match had on indie wrestling in the States. Much like Lee's days was a decade previously, this bout was like looking through a window into a whole other world, hence why this is definitely one of the most memorable and I think definitive 5-star ratings. This love of the new, and particularly love of the moves and the absolute desire to be surprised, does also go a fair way towards explaining the relative lack of 5-star ratings for one company in particular, and you obviously don't need to guess which one that is, seeing as it is the biggest in the world. In recent years, the WWE have managed to increase their total of 5-star bouts to a very respectable 19, tying them for 4th with All Japan Women. Although nearly half of that is down to matches from NXT. If you were to separate WWE and NXT from each other, then that WWE number goes down to 10 overall. For the longest time, the main event WWE style isn't something that, over the years and until very recently really, has hugely appealed to big man Meltzer's tastes. That much is clear. It's a very proven, tried and tested formula, something that even at its most technical would depend on spamming the same moves over and over, something that often purposefully tried to avoid much in the way of innovation. Most of the time wrestlers simply have had to fit into this formula, no matter what they specialise in. So for a long time, WWE matches needed to catch some sort of lightning in a bottle to reach the mark that went beyond conventions. You needed the daredevil creativity of HBK and Razor Ramon with that ladder, the bitter sibling rivalry and technical excellence of Brett and Owen, the once-in-a-lifetime Austin and Hart double turn, HBK and Taker's hatred and blood that truly started a new era, the utterly relatable yet out-of-nowhere turn of events that took Punk and Cena to greatness. Such things don't exactly come around every other day, and simply at its core, the WWE house style isn't enough to be a machine for generating 5-star ratings, at least in the opinion of one man, not like 90s All Japan was, for example. People often mention various folks, Kurt Angle being one in particular, as someone who really should have earned at least one 5-star rating over the course of his career. To me, the fact that Angle ended up with several 4.75s, but didn't get that 5, isn't so much down to his skills as a worker, which were of course exemplary, it was down to having to fit that into the typical WWE main event style, which 99 times out of 100 wasn't able to take that extra little step to get there. That and his best work also, unfortunately, happened in the aforementioned barren wastelands of the 2000s, when the WWE monopoly scarcely had to try, and anything truly great happening was tantamount to a glitch in the system. Over the last few years, especially now with Triple H fully at the helm, things are changing on this front. The style has a brand new coat of paint, is much more flexible, and honestly much more in line with what can be seen in other favoured promotions, and it's got plenty more of those folks who are capable of the archetypal banger after banger who are right in the Meltzer wheelhouse. Gunther, Cody Rhodes, Seth Rollins, AJ Styles, Sami Zayn, Kevin Owens, all sorts. That and, as you can see, there's a pretty marked difference in quality when the company is, as they have been for the last couple of years, actually trying. Now we come to the hot button issues. You know, the AEW type ones. Some people get very loud about some people who tend to get lots of 5-star ratings. Kenny Omega, Jon Moxley, the Young Bucks, Will Ospreay, those folks. They treat it like it's some sort of conspiracy. Clearly they're all mates of Meltzer and are desperately trying to appease to him. Therefore Meltzer's obviously going to be handing out stars to them like they're candy. For these people, the accruement of asterisks on a sheet of paper from one 64-year-old man is more important than any kind of sensible business practice, or indeed taking care of your own body. Slightly strawmanning for comedic effect? Perhaps, but things can get pretty heated in the world of IWC discourse, and certainly not that exaggerated when it comes to the land of YouTube and podcasts. I've heard Jim Cornette flat out call it a conspiracy that, for example, Jon Moxley has more 5-star ratings than the entirety of the WWE put together has from 1981 through to 2011. The more sensible argument, and the one that doesn't completely miss the forest for the trees, is the outsized influence one promotion in particular has had on the entirety of pro wrestling since the start of the 2010s, with the creation and the relentless pushing of a style that, well, just so happens to appeal massively to many wrestling fans, including Big Dave. And that promotion is New Japan. People aren't chasing Meltzer's stars. They're chasing the Jado and Gedo booked Bushiroad New Japan, the one that had Kazuchika Okada at the helm for a decade or more, amongst plenty of other players, including a handful of the people we've just mentioned. Over the years, according to Meltz, 97 5-star matches have occurred in a New Japan ring, pretty close to doubling the second placed All Japan. And if you break this down further, a grand total of 9 of those matches happened before 2012. When Hiroshi Tanahashi took on Minoru Suzuki on October 8, 2012 at King of Pro Wrestling, that was the signal for the floodgates to open and for the company's style to become dominant. Manna from heaven for so many fans. The timeline tells its own stories. From that October 8th match, it took a little over 3 years for any other wrestling company to land a 5-star, a time in which New Japan landed 7 more. In fact, aside from one 5-star for Dragon Gate in 2015 and one for PWG in 2016, we have a virtually unbroken near 5-year run of the 5 stars, or indeed more than that, exclusively belonging to New Japan. That's how impressive and how dominant their style has become. It took that long for other companies to catch up, and this is what has changed the way that people have wrestled and the whole style of wrestling companies, whether they be Pro Wrestling Guerrilla, All Elite Wrestling, or WWE in the form of NXT, and also really in the form of WWE nowadays. All 3 of these companies took a whole ton of cues from 2010's New Japan, which critically speaking was a high watermark for wrestling not seen since the heyday of King's Road. Dave has, by his own admission, gotten softer in his age. He is happy to admit that yes, a lot of the wrestling that's out there is the sort that he really enjoys, and so he's well aware that he's been delivering those 5 stars a lot more. In all seriousness, it really shouldn't be that big a problem. And yet it is still this hugely important thing, to the point where an interview with Dave Meltzer can potentially consist of virtually nothing but Chris Van Vliet grilling him over his star ratings, which is, I don't know, kinda ridiculous. It's just one man's opinion, regardless of how long he's been around. No matter what you've been told, Dave Meltzer is not God. He's a 60-something guy operating out of a very messy office in Campbell, California, and while the star ratings have certainly had a great impact on what wrestling gets consumed over the years, and they're a great place for people to start when it comes to getting into pro wrestling, nowadays, they aren't the only place. So perhaps it's time to highlight more wrestling critique, rather than just hammering the single one, for his sake if nothing else. We do of course have the democratic option, in the shape of the German website and essential resource Cage Match, one where all matches and wrestlers can get a rating thanks to its users. This sort of approach has its own problems, a la Metacritic and the like, but it can be a very handy overview. There are still many excellent blogs and boards kicking about. They've often been doing their thing for a long while, but the likes of Segunda Caída, Lucha Blog, and Pro Wrestling Only are still essential, and still great places to find alternative views that people may not always agree with, but they're usually damn well argued, and they'll point you to things worth watching. And of course there's the good parts of social media, which do shockingly still exist. Plenty of passionate Twitter accounts and YouTube channels, whether they're highlighting the classics, going right into the fringes, expressing this love in everything from articles and YouTube docs to compilations and music videos. Wrestling may feature some of the very worst discourse out there, some of the most toxic, the most absolutely unadulteratedly shitty on social media, but it also has some of the very best, the sort where just a single sentence or a little clip can send you on a voyage of discovery. Discovering these things is certainly a better use of time than making conspiracies out of a rating scale that, in the end, and in the eyes of even its very harshest critic, doesn't actually mean anything. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video, and until the next time, bye for now.